Hey everyone, thanks for showing up yet again. Your presence is greatly appreciated. Today we have an interesting one. Shutter Island is a 2010 psychological thriller mystery directed by Martin Scorsese. It stars my personal idol, Leonardo DiCaprio, as well as Mark Ruffalo, and is about two detectives who are brought to a psych hospital on an island off the coast of Massachusetts to investigate a missing persons case. If you haven't seen the film, I highly recommend watching it first before this video because I'm about to spoil everything. Thank me later. Like all my videos, I'll be discussing the metaphysical and spiritual symbolism or themes I find, the overall theme here being that of Earth and Hell, which aren't always thought of as mutually exclusive depending on who you ask. As it turns out, the case Teddy is on is actually his own. His primary doctor has put together a mock investigation in order to guide Teddy in working through the experience that caused his psychosis. And throughout the duration of the investigation, his doctor will be playing Chuck, his partner from Seattle. The theme I mentioned earlier of Hell and Earth have to do with the karma of the soul and its journey through the physical plane. Our protagonist Teddy is going to a place, Hell, or Earth, represented as the asylum to work through his past life. There is trauma from his past that he can't let go of, and so he must reincarnate in hopes of working through it. Chuck could be seen as his guardian angel or spirit guide or even higher self. Chuck asks him about his family, the family representing Teddy's past life because it's what he's forgotten or rather chosen to block out from reality. When arriving to the island, we hear a guard mention that they only take the most damaged, meaning the most damaged souls come to heal themselves. Ben Kingsley plays Dr. Colley, the Institute director. He could be seen as representing God, being that he runs the place. I mention this because of the debate as to whether or not God is the ultimate judge of our lives on Earth, or if it is in fact ourselves as God. Teddy calls them prisoners, but Dr. Colley insists on calling them patients. This may hint at the Earth being more of a place of healing and growth rather than a prison planet as many have come to believe. Teddy comments on how many of these violent defenders don't deserve this level of care. With his ego identity of U.S. Marshal, he is unaware that he himself is one of these offenders, and so believes himself to be separate from the others. This is a big part of the healing to be done in us. The shifting from the lie of separation to the truth of unity, learning to have compassion and unconditional love for our fellow inmates. Also in this scene, we hear more about the case they're on, which relates in part to Teddy's past. This marks the real beginning to the experimental treatment. Dr. Colley says the missing patient's name is Rachel and that she was committed for drowning her 3 children in the lake behind her house. We can see on Teddy's face that hearing this has some sort of an effect, even if just on a subconscious level. Though they disguise his treatment as the case he's there to solve, the doctors are hoping that this last-ditch effort of playing out this fantasy will help him come to acceptance of his children's death, as well as that of his wife at his own hand. Dr. Colley hands Teddy a picture of the supposed missing Rachel, which triggers a flashback of sorts. This could represent more past lives and soul trauma from his life in the war. I say of sorts because his memory is getting mixed up between which bodies died where and who is who. So, the good doctor goes on describing Rachel's psychosis, which is actually Teddy's psychosis, saying that in the 2 years of her being there, she has never once acknowledged it as being a hospital and believes she is living her normal life, even going as far as assigning parts for the people around her to play, like a partner from Seattle. Later we meet Dr. Jeremiah Nearing, who calls the detectives men of violence and gives a quick psychological assessment at Teddy's request. It's here that we're shown even more scenes from his past life in the war. I feel like this in particular hints at his unresolved soul karma, his being a man of violence, not to be confused with being a violent man, as Dr. Nearing put it, leads him to be an alcoholic and workaholic, which in turn leads his wife to doing what she did, and thus leading to his psychosis. That night, Teddy dreams of his wife, and we hear what seems to be a sort of dream premonition saying, Rachel never left, and that he's here, referring to a man named Laeta. The dream being of his deceased wife could suggest again his attachment to a past life. The next day, when interviewing some of the other patients, we hear the name Laeta come up again. Andrew Laeta is Teddy's true identity, although in the fantasy, he's become a sort of proto-antagonist to his past, someone he believes caused his wife's death, who, in the fantasy, lit the apartment fire in which she supposedly perished. Later, after searching the grounds, Dr. Colley informs them that they found Rachel, and during her interrogation, something about her story seems to have an effect on Teddy, when she mentions taking a long swim in the lake. This is because he knows on a subconscious level what it meant for him and his Rachel, being his drowned daughter. When hunkering down for the coming storm, we finally get a glimpse of the warden of this Earth plane, and we all know who the warden is supposed to be, don't we? Teddy even gives us a hint, saying, "Looks like an old military prick." Military? War in heaven? Need I say more? That night, his dreams continued to haunt him. Interesting how in both this film and Inception, Leo's character dreams of his kids as well as a wife suffering a psychotic break. And they both experience a false reality, so to speak. Fun fact, Leo filmed both back to back. Still dreaming, Teddy has what is called a false awakening, when we believe we've woken up from a dream but are in fact still dreaming. He sees his dead wife come in from the storm and tells him Laeta is here, alive, and in Ward C, and that he needs to find him and kill him. The next morning, the detectives decide to check out Ward C while the hospital is busy recovering from the storm. Maybe they'll find Laeta there. This ward definitely has more of a hellish feel to it. Now Teddy seems to be traveling through a different layer of hell with only a match flame to guide him. The light of Christhood, maybe? It's here that we meet a patient that Teddy imagines could be Laeta, demanding to see his face and telling him it's about exposing the truth. But what truth? The truth of Laeta burning his apartment in his fantasy? Or the truth behind his fantasy itself? Or maybe the hidden meaning of the film? The patient tries to explain things to Teddy, but not before he demands to see his face, at which point he recognizes him as George Noyce, another character in his detective fantasy, his supposed contact who fed him information about the conspiracy regarding the asylum. George tells him he's not investigating anything, that it's all for you, calling him a rat in a maze. At this point, Teddy hallucinates his wife again, and George seems to realize this. Them having been patients together, he knows Teddy's story and says in order to discover the truth, he has to let her go, to which Teddy responds, "I can't," and George replies, "Then you'll never get off this island." As someone who's done a good deal of inner observation regarding the desire for romantic relationships and the idea of soulmates, this almost feels like it's hinting at the need to detach from these desires as well as from past lovers. As I mentioned before, his life as Andrew Laeta represents a past life, whereas his life as Teddy represents his present life. So when George says you need to let her go to discover the truth, I think it's referring to this deep wound we feel subconsciously on a soul level, one that causes us to want to reincarnate again and again if it means a chance to be with this person we're attached to. It's only when we can overcome this desire that we can truly move on to higher states of being. Before Teddy leaves, George concludes that if Laeta isn't in any of the wards, it must mean that he's in the lighthouse, adding, "God help you." Chuck catches up with Teddy, and it would appear that some of the things George mentioned are starting to make him doubt Chuck's role as his partner in all of this. And it seems Chuck can tell Teddy's trust is waning. After failing to get to the lighthouse, Teddy hallucinates what he believes to be Chuck's body over a cliff, and climbing down, discovers a woman hiding in a cave, claiming to be Rachel Solando, who refers to him as the Marshal. She then goes on to disclose the conspiracy that Teddy believes is the real reason he's come there. And from what she's claiming, it would appear the conspiracy is in fact true and not just part of his fantasy. On a more meta side, I feel like this could be hinting at real-life conspiracies such as Project Monarch. In the symbolic, however, she could represent an earthbound guide rather than astral like Chuck represents. given that they're secluded in the wilderness by fireside, sharing certain truths of his reality, almost like a shaman or guru. The next morning, he's awakened by Cave Rachel, which helps solidify her as real and not just a hallucination. After finding his way to the main road, he is immediately picked up by the Warden, whom I mentioned earlier is meant to represent the Fallen One, Lord of this plane. He uses some pretty telling words here that help illustrate his symbolic role, asking, "Did you enjoy God's latest gift, the violence," referring to the storm. He continues with, "God loves violence," and Teddy replies that he hadn't noticed, which the Warden retorts with, "Of course he does, why else would there be so much of it?" saying it's in us, and it was given to wage in his honor. Teddy claims God gave them moral order, but the Warden counters that there is no moral order, that Teddy's as violent as they come, and that if the constraints of society fell away and he came between Teddy and a meal, Teddy would destroy him. Teddy defends, saying, "You don't know me," but the Warden insists that he does, giving another hint at his role, saying, "We've known each other for centuries." And indeed, he's right. He and man have had centuries to get to know each other. I find this character perfectly cast, and I feel this is one of the most telling scenes of the hidden meaning of the film, that of the relationship between man and the Lord of this earth plane, the Warden. After returning to the facility, Teddy inquires as to Chuck's whereabouts, but Dr. Colley denies there having ever been a partner from Seattle, claiming Teddy came there alone. And after a quick shower, we can tell that Teddy is feeling a bit trapped as he's shown sneaking around the hospital in order to escape the island. But first, he's got to check out the lighthouse. On his way, he stops to rig up a distraction in the form of a car explosion, but not before having another chat with his dead wife, who tells him if he goes to the lighthouse, he'll die. That is, the identity of Teddy will die. He finally makes it to the lighthouse, which represents ascension and illumination. He's ready to face the truth of who he is, the truth behind his fantasy and reality. Upon entering, he climbs the stairs to the top, where he finds Dr. Colley, who begins dismantling Teddy's fantasy. Chuck enters, or rather Dr. Sheehan, revealing that he's been Teddy's primary psychiatrist the whole time, saying someone had to stick by you, again hinting at him representing a spirit guide of sorts. The two go on explaining that he himself is Andrew Laetus, and that he's been a patient there for the last 2 years, and that the case has been their attempt at letting him play out the fantasy in hopes that it would allow him to work through his trauma, saying after failing so much to get through to him, they were forced to try something drastic, or something would have to be done, likely meaning he'd have to be lobotomized. Dr. Colley says, "We're on the front lines of a war here, old boy," perhaps trying to relate to his past as a soldier, though the character is referring to the hospital and psychiatric treatments in general, up against the public eye and government funding. It may also hint at the war in heaven, and right now it comes down to you, the viewer, the one whom this message is meant for. We decide in every moment of now to continue in the fantasy of our ego or to awaken to the truth, and to embody the vibration that will raise us above this earth plane. Andrew then freaks out and goes for the gun, but after realizing it's fake, the two doctors take this opportunity to press the truth of his psychosis, that due to the neglect of his marriage, his wife, a suicidal manic depressive, set their apartment on fire and drowned their 3 children at their lake house, and that after coming home to find them, had shot her out of grief. Still unwilling to accept it, he attacks Sheehan, but Colley intervenes with pictures of his dead family, one of which being Rachel, his daughter, whom we've been seeing hallucinations of throughout the film. It's here that we're finally shown the events of that tragic day. The next scene, we see Andrew, not Teddy, waking up from sleep, now having fully accepted the truth. He is forced to vocalize his shift in psyche for the Warden, admitting that, in truth, he killed his children, since he failed to get his wife the help she needed after her first suicidal attempt. He's then told this isn't the first time they've had a breakthrough, and that every time they did, he would inevitably regress. Colley expresses his hopes that in their playing out the fantasy, this time it'll have a lasting effect. In this final scene, Andrew and Sheehan are seen sharing one last cigarette when Andrew refers to the doctor as Chuck, appearing to have regressed yet again. Sheehan gives the signal to Kali that they've failed and to have Andrew lobotomized. But before he's taken, Andrew seems to give himself away, saying, "This place makes me wonder which is worse, to live as a monster or to die as a good man," hinting at himself still being lucid as Andrew, but choosing to end it anyway. Thank you for watching my video on Shutter Island. I was really excited to cover it when I first gleaned this less than obvious hidden meaning, so I'm happy to share it with you and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking to the end. I've got some more on the way. See you then.